Welcome back. This has been a challenging week for President Trump. And as we've been saying, it's not yet over. Think about it this way. The week starts with members of his own party breaking with him over the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Then Trump had to spend yesterday morning sitting next to people he has personally attacked while listening to testimonials about a former president's enduring legacy as a heroic military veteran, as the consummate public servant in the modern era of this country, and as a family man. Peter Baker of the New York Times, reporting on Trump's mindset, says the president has been, quote, snappish with aides most of the week, according to administration officials, miffed in part by so many ceremonial events not related to him. He was impatient for the memorials to end, but expressed pride in himself for remaining publicly civil. People close to the president called it a course correction after his peevish reaction to Mr. McCain's death. Trump ended his night last night tweeting out his 50% approval rating in the most recent poll. And of course, tomorrow brings more Mueller memos, as we've been talking about, and more uncertainty. Well, with us tonight, Tim O'Brien, the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. More importantly, he wrote the book on this subject. He's the author of Trump Nation: The Art of Being the Donald. I have wanted to have you on for so long.
Thank you, Brian.
So let's put him on the couch, and let's begin with the following tableau. He walks into the National Cathedral. The other presidents are seated. He is wearing his overcoat. He takes it off and hands said crumpled overcoat to the young Marine officer who was acting as his escort. Then, of course, he sits down, and so much ink has been spilled over the last 24 hours on those he did and did not greet. What's going on there?
You know, I think, and this is, putting him on the couch, so we're both sort of speculating here, but I think clothing for Donald Trump is armor. Why didn't he just leave the coat, the overcoat, in the back of the seat? And he's worn the same outfit since the 80s. He's almost like he's been cryogenically frozen in the late 1980s.
It's a look that he wants to project.
And I think the look he wants to project is powerful Fortune 500 CEO. That's his approximation of it. Of course, it's almost a cartoonish version of that, but it alternately gives him security, and it's also, I think, it allows him to keep people at a distance. And that's really the interesting thing about him, because for all of the bluster and all of the bravado and the braggadocio, he's a deeply insecure person. And so these costumes he wears insulates him from that. And I thought it was extraordinary at this event in the National Cathedral, with all of the pomp and circumstances involved in it, he couldn't just strip that off and leave it be. And then he ends up sort of crumpling it and giving it into the hands of the surprised military attaché.
And when the reading started, it's been said he did not participate in the service at all. Then there was just the way he carried himself while seated. His hands together, he was rocking at one point. It was impossible to listen to the eulogies and not take some of it as a kind of comparison to the sitting president. It was not intended that way, I'm certain. But people thought he looked petulant. People thought he looked angry at the content of the eulogies.
Well, first off, let's look at what was being said about George Herbert Walker Bush. What was being said was, regardless of what side of the aisle you resided on politically, whether you thought his policies were successful or failures, at his core, this was a decent man who lived his life well, who was considerate of the people he did politics with. He was loving to his family members, and in a long and successful marriage with his wife. Almost every one of those points are not a description of who Donald Trump is. And he had to be sitting there being very aware of that, because it wasn't just John Meacham's eulogy. Right? Alan Simpson gave a very beautiful recounting of what
Mulrooney about the statesman.
Yes, and talking about trade policies that Trump has overturned. So he's sitting there, and he has to know at some point in the future, whenever that occurs, he's going to get a state funeral, and it's likely these same sort of things aren't going to be said about him. And so I wondered, watching him, where does that go, in his mind as an adult man in the world right now? And my estimation of where it goes is probably nowhere. Donald Trump is 72 years old. He is not somebody at this point who is going to change. You know, Liz Smith, the gossip columnist, once said to me, she had this great Texas twang, and she said,
Yeah.
you know, honey, all you ever really have to know about Donald Trump is he's a 7-year-old grown old. And he really is. And one of the reasons he hasn't evolved is he was born into great wealth. And that insulated him from having either some of the hard lessons of life or learning from mistakes that many of us do. He then graduated out of that into celebrityhood through The Apprentice and his TV presence. That gave him another layer of insulation. And now he's in the White House. He has this magnificent third layer of insulation from reality. And he doesn't have to really suffer the consequences of his mistakes and shortcomings.
And I was just going to say about Mueller.
Yeah.
I have a buddy who was a corrections officer in New York State for many years. People who don't know the prison system may not know they are not armed when they are among the inmate population. And he always said, when I asked him, what was the lesson of all those years you spent inside with the inmates? He said, never corner a man.
Yeah.
Always leave a man an out, even the slightest crack, so that they feel they're not cornered, because cornered people get desperate. Does Donald Trump feel cornered by the Mueller investigation?
I think Donald Trump certainly feels cornered by it. One of the best barometers is when he starts unleashing tweet after tweet, describing the investigation as a witch hunt, stepping right up to what I would, think of as an investigative reporter as witness tampering.
In plain sight.
In plain sight. And in part, it's because he's unsophisticated and ignorant. He has never been in the kind of legal vice he is in right now. Never in his whole life. He's had the SEC come close to him. He's had the FBI in Atlantic City with organized crime investigations. But he hasn't had a veteran prosecutor like Robert Mueller with a team of 13 highly talented people who are content not to be in the press and who are content just to take out their notebooks and make little check marks and file papers and move the legal ball forward. And he doesn't really know how to handle that. He's ill-equipped legally. He's got Emmett Flood in the White House. He's a good attorney. But then he has this odd Greek chorus of Rudy Giuliani and Alan Dershowitz out there babbling. And that's not a legal strategy. That's performance art. And the problem here is Donald Trump is a performance artist who is now getting pushed into a corner by Bob Mueller. And I've thought for quite some time now that the real trigger here will be if his son, Don Jr., gets indicted, or if Jared Kushner gets indicted. If he gets a whiff of any of those things, he'll lash out. I think it's highly likely he'll try to fire Mueller.
Well, we'll see. I tell people, go back and look at the opening sequence of The Apprentice for all those years. The iconography,
right.
The way he carried himself, the music, and in some way, it's a key to understanding who he is. Tim O'Brien, our thanks. And again, this book is called Trump Nation: The Art of Being the Donald.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.